Well, thank you for coming along to join us. It's nice to see so many of you here supporting the only daily paper that supports you on a daily basis. My name is Carolyn Jones. I am Vice Chair of the Morning Star Management Committee. And when I say management, don't get confused. The Morning Star is a cooperative body responsible to its shareholders, and any one of you here can be a shareholder of the Morning Star. I believe there's a little card on each chair that tells you how you can take shares out in the paper. That then allows you to come along to our AGM, vote on how we are run, how we are organised and what we do. So consider taking that out. We currently have 12 trade unions with seats on the management committee, with the Bakers Union being the latest to join our ranks. I'm especially pleased to see Sarah Woolley join us today, and that little picture opportunity at the beginning was Sarah receiving her share certificate from the Morning Star. So, you know, bonuses, you get to come to our AGM and you get to take home a framed share certificate. What more could you ask for from a newspaper? The title of today's meeting is Educate, Agitate and Organise, the media's role in the fight for a new deal for workers. At the Morning Star, we know our role is to support trade unions in their fight for a new deal for workers. And to do that, we not only report and support the work of trade unions on a daily basis, but we use the pages of our paper to carry articles that help to educate, agitate and organise amongst working people. Our close links with the trade union members, and as I say, there's 12 who sit on our management committee, those close links mean that the Morning Star is in a perfect position to reflect the needs of the labour movement. That's why we'll never run away from picket lines. That's why when every single paper in the country had pictures of royalty on the front page, the Morning Star's front page highlighted Truss's plans to let bankers earn more while workers pay for it. And that's why, you know, we will provide the news and the coverage that your disputes deserve. Disputes that other papers often ignore or if not scorn. And why is that important? Because we know that the mainstream monopoly media will turn their guns on trade unions, which they're already doing, and on public sector workers, and on all strikers to save their friends in the city or in the boardrooms or the lobbyists in the corridors of power in Parliament. Only the Morning Star, owned by its readers, shines out as offering an alternative vision of the world. And to share that vision of the world, we have a number of trade unionists joining us here today on our platform. So I will get down to introducing them. And our first speaker today is Sarah Woolley, who is, as you know, is the first woman General Secretary of the Bakers Union. And what an impression she has made since taking over that role in 2019. She's a firm supporter of the paper. She often writes articles that we cover, and she's here with us today. So over to you, Sarah.
Trade unions, as we know, are only typically in the media when we're on strike, and we're misrepresented by the right-wing media at every opportunity. So if you've no knowledge of what a trade union is, the first thing you see about us is something negative, which is likely to put you off being involved, isn't it? After all, why would you spend your hard-earned cash to line the pockets of trade union barons on figures salaries? And I know I'm speaking to the converted in this room. There's a reason why you're here at Congress, and you're all delegates or visitors, otherwise you wouldn't be sat in this room. But no worker chooses to go on strike lightly. No worker chooses to lose a day's pay lightly, you know, especially at the minute with the cost of living crisis. And I know some of the bigger unions can give some financial support, but that's not something that everybody can do. And so workers are losing wages walking out of work. So it means things have got to be pretty bloody horrific, especially at the minute, for people to choose to lose pay in the climate that we're living in. But more and more unionised workers are striking and standing together and demanding better like the key workers they are, because we know otherwise that things are just going to get tougher. But rather than recognise in the mainstream media, because we know the Morning Star absolutely does, that food workers and bus drivers and prison officers and lecturers, the list goes on, are relying on food banks, or that for years, you know, public sector workers, including PCS members and NHS workers and firefighters, have had pay freezes, which is effectively a pay cut, whilst their expectations and the workload have doubled, tripled and then some. Many of them are now, you know, fleeing the industries that they've spent decades working for, passionately giving their lives to, because they're becoming too ill to do that or not able to simply afford to continue in those roles anymore. Rather than see stories like that, we see stories about train drivers being on 80 grand a year and how greedy they are for asking more money when we're in a cost of living crisis. We see headlines stating that trade union leaders are on £100,000 plus salaries and trying to take the country back to the 70s or to a standstill. Well, I'm on nowhere near £100,000 a year, and nobody was using a food bank in the 70s. So take us back there tomorrow for me. We see attacks on the teaching unions and PCS and others because it's more divisive to be selective with the truth, or in some cases just a downright lie, than it is it's better for the government to turn worker on worker than it is for us to collectively challenge them. And that's what they want. And the unions up until the last couple of months, and I'll come back to that, haven't really had a platform in the mainstream media and haven't really pushed enough to challenge the misinformation out there. The biggest one, the paid officials, are the union and not the membership. And we're great at talking, and we've spoke about this morning, we're great at talking to our own movement and calling out all of that to each other, but we know it's not reaching those outside of our echo chamber in the same way that the mainstream media does. So people outside of our movement, the 18 million workers that are not currently in a trade union, millions of them don't know what we are and switch off from politics because we're all the same, they're all the same. And they begin to believe what they're hearing and reading because it's eating them from morning until night, from waking up until going to bed, the same thing repeatedly. And if you talk something often enough, you start to believe it's truth, don't you? Regardless. Blaming workers for wanting more pay when they're wanting more pay causing the inflation, rather than the true greediness of companies like Shell and BP who have made billions of pounds out of the first 2 quarters of 2022, whilst we know that our members and probably your members are debating whether they're going to put the bloody heating on when the weather turns cold. Nobody talks about that. It's all down to the workers, isn't it? Other than the money stuff. It's all down to the workers, but I think we are starting to see shoots to change. You know, I can list a full, we've seen them this morning speaking, you know, your Mick Lynch's, Eddie Dempsey's, Dave Ward, Kevin's done it as well, he's been on the news, are really good and having an increased presence in the media. But, you know, I don't think they thought they were going to be as good as they were. You know, there was no reason, no intention of putting them on if they thought that actually the public might respond positively. But it is a short window of opportunity that you've all grasped fantastically. But it'll disappear as quick as it comes because they don't want trade unions talking about what trade unions actually are. Because then the public might start to believe that they can enact change as well. And as the Mick disappears again off the news channels, the rhetoric from the right wing will step up, but not just from the media, but you know, you just have to look at Twitter at the number of Tory MPs and general right wings that fascist Twitter bios wading in to talk about salaries and things that they've got absolutely no bloody idea what they're talking about, but the news is saying it, so they're getting away with saying it because it's got to be true. But for me, something that's become more and more obvious over the last couple of years, and I've just spoken about it on the rostrum, is the public's lack of knowledge of the work that our members do. You know, food workers working 12-hour shifts, tipping bread out of hot tins, boxing fondant fancies, or I mentioned hand rolling Swiss rolls, train drivers having to literally hold in the need to go to the toilet because of a lack of access to facilities, or putting their lives at risk jumping down onto the track to go, bus drivers being attacked and having to rely on food banks, postal workers passing out, station staff talking people out of doing terrible things, university staff becoming counsellors and teachers and everything else. You could just go on and on and on about all the things that our members do far above and beyond the job description that they get paid for on a daily basis. And none of this is reported in the mainstream media. And when these workers get to the point of having enough and utilising their only means of showing that by removing the labour, because negotiations have fallen, then they get attacked by the right-wing media. And that's why our movement needs to get our members' real-life experiences out there. And it isn't easy getting, you know, some of the rags to talk about workers positively. And it's why we need the Morning Star in workplaces, because that the paper does get our members' real life stories out there, the struggles that our members are going through. And wouldn't it be great if every unionised workplace had a copy of the Morning Star every day delivered to it? I mean, that would be fantastic, wouldn't it? We'd start to really break through some of the crap. As I mentioned, and I've nearly finished now, there are 18 million people not in trade unions, and we've got to reach out and organise these workers. We've got to move outside of our normal circles and echo chambers and talk to them. Not all of them are going to agree with us. Some of them are going to be downright rude because of the perceptions that they've got and the stereotypes, but the most successful conversations are often the hardest to have. And we've got to try, because we can't rely on the Tories. They've shown us time and time again they don't care about us. You know, the Labour Party, if they get in, are they going to make much difference? Who knows? We've got to do it ourselves with the resources that we have. The Morning Star is absolutely one of them, and I'm really proud that our executive made the decision to sit on the management committee. Thank you.
I want to start by obviously saying thank you to the staff for creating this forum, and I'm quite proud to be here because I've been a reader of the paper for as long as I can remember, and a shareholder personally, and I'm glad that I managed to persuade our executive along with our General Secretary to do the right thing and step up, because it's important that we have a voice, and at the minute we don't have a voice at all other than this newspaper, and it's really important that we do get that message across. As Sarah was saying earlier on, we are inundated day in, day out by the right-wing media, whether that's in the written word, whether it's on the various radio stations, and the Twitter storm, which are, I can only assume in the main are Russian bots, because some of the stuff that seems to constantly appear, which is a real concern. We do need a strong voice, and at the minute we're more united than I think we've ever been, and that's, I think, really refreshing. And I don't know it's because we're all relaxed because of the way the Tories are pulling themselves to pieces, but we want to make sure that we continue to have that unified voice so that we speak as one. We are facing crisis after crisis, and the Tory created and generated cost of living increases, which isn't enough for them. You know, to see our members suffering and not being able to put food on the table isn't enough. They're now coming after what little trade union rights we have left, because we had the audacity to organise and take industrial action, and we need to make sure that we say we're not prepared to put up with that. So one of the things my union has done, we took Tesco's to court to get an injunction against them around fire and rehire. You would have thought that they would have accepted the court's injunction, but they appealed it. We won again. They appealed it again. They won this time, but now we're going to the Supreme Court, because here's a company that's worth billions and billions of pounds and seems to think that it's okay to take pounds and pounds off of our members who aren't particularly well paid to start with, but they were the ones who put them on those high levels of wages in the first place after years of negotiations with us. So we will fight by whatever means we need to ensure that our members' terms and conditions aren't protected, they're actually enhanced. So we stand by the CWU, by the NEU, by every organisation that's taken industrial action, and we will be right alongside there. And what those disputes have done is it's raised the profile of the trade union movement, and we know in the retail sector in particular it's really difficult to organise effectively, mainly for two reasons. People aren't traditional trade unionists when they go to work in retail, because often it's seen as a stopgap job that you do for a little while until you find something better, although they're real jobs. But also because I think people just don't get what we're about. You know, we're not asking for something that's not unreasonable. All we're saying is our people work really hard and deserve to be treated better and paid accordingly. The retail sector is a traditional area of low pay, exploitative pay. That's the reality of it. And we need to make sure that those employers that can afford to pay more, and that's the vast majority of the people we work with, actually do start paying people the rate for the job. And not only do our members see exploitation by their employers, but they're also getting abuse every single day of the week by customers often. And some of that comes because these employers decide to deliberately understaff their stores, and of course the customer takes that out on the person who serves them on the checkout or on the counter. So we see people every day telling us about not just the fear of violence and attacks, but real attacks and abuse, and that's really hard for people to take. So I think that the way that we're all uniting together to bring about change has to be a good thing and a positive thing. We want to make sure that the things that have been forgotten about, our members, people that work in retail and other low paid sectors like that, shouldn't be forgotten about and shouldn't be ignored. Because if we get that message across to everybody, then people will join the trade union movement. And going back to the Toll Puddle Martyrs, unions have always been about organising around particular issues, and that's what we need to do more of now. And I want to stand side by side with other trade unionists who are making their message clear so that we can share those concerns, and rather than compete amongst each other, which we've done with too many times, we've had history of fighting for each other. There are millions of people out there who don't know about trade unions, who aren't organised, and we can reach out and actually get those people to become members and active members as well. So it is about getting people to wake up. It is about putting some fire in people's belly to say the way it is isn't the way that it has to be. Because I think more than anything, there is a real appetite for change at this moment in time. You've only got to see it out there. People are sick to death of the exploitation that's going on in their name, and we need to make sure that's the end of it. Because the country is falling apart, but that's not because of anything the unions have done. The fact is, low wages aren't a result of trade unions. Food banks, people queuing up at food banks, people in work who can't even afford to buy food in the shops that they work within. Those aren't trade union faults. People worried about putting the electricity on or losing their homes. None of these things are the responsibility of the trade union movement, but you wouldn't believe it, because the Tory answer to this is, let's take away what few rights we may have, yes, left as organisations. And Sarah made the point really well at the beginning. We are good at talking to ourselves, and we can all be happy with each other about the things that we're talking about. We need to take the message outside of this room, and the best way to do that is by sharing our own personal stories and our own personal experiences. That's why this paper is so important, but it's also about us talking to people, for example. And I know I was speaking to somebody, one of our members, just last week in a store, who was telling me, it's hard not to be heartbroken by these stories, how she has to send her children to school with shoes that have got holes in because she can't afford to actually put a pair of shoes on their feet. She has to sometimes go hungry because she can't afford to make sure that there's food on the table for them. And her employer, a very big employer, I won't say who they are, but their name begins with J and S, they're saying, well, we provide free food sometimes in the canteens. That free food is often a pot noodle, which I don't believe is a meal for anybody. So we need to do something there to make sure something is done about those things. And the more we share those stories, it resonates more with people when you're talking about something that happened to them. It is an absolute disgrace that we have this back to this kind of trickle down economics where, you know, if you sit around the table long enough, you may find a few crumbs. It's not good enough, and we need to make sure those things change. And somebody said to me the other day, one of the best definitions of this is, there's a rich kid with all the toys he could possibly want for in the world. And if the poor kid sits there long enough, it may be that the rich kid gets a bit fed up with one of the toys and passes it on. That isn't good enough. This country is incredibly wealthy, and our members, everybody deserves more. So, look, enough is enough. We need to get out there and organise the unorganised. Actually get people to join trade unions, to become active in the trade union movement, and to say, we want better. Start fires with people. Make sure that people understand the importance of trade union membership, that they value the trade union membership, and they see what we're trying to do, which isn't cause problems for them. It's actually trying to bring solutions to the problems. And I want to pay special thanks to the reps that we have, certainly in our organisation, and I'm sure you say the same, Kevin. Without the reps who do the day in, day out dirty stuff, no trade union would actually exist. And it's a pleasure to work alongside people who give up the most precious thing they've got, which is their own time, to make a difference, a positive difference to people's lives. I want everybody to play part of bringing down this Tory government. And we can do that if we continue to fight against our common enemy rather than against our own. I'd close by saying one more thing. It's about time, not for another change in Tory leadership, because the Muppets at the top of the stage can change. The message doesn't. We need a general election, we need it today, and we need to elect a Labour government that will put into practice so many of the things that we need for our members. Thank you for the time.
UNITE has engaged on a mission to collectivise, to bring people forward and to fight back, and I think we've done an amazing job over the last 9 months. We've had over 400 strikes, and it was £150 million into the pockets of workers. But I was listening to Shannon on Sky News, and it was Sunday morning, and she basically said that it's actually £200 million we've put into the pockets of workers, and I'll be telling them to get out there and start buying the Morning Star with all that money. But, nevertheless, it just shows, doesn't it, that workers are emboldened. And I was like, we were at the last stage of our pay negotiations, where we had the national officer in and all that, and he come down and he started talking about UNILEVER profiteering, and they said, how dare you, we're not doing that. But we'd had a presentation the same day about how they put their costs that have been incurred onto the customer to the tune of 18%. They said, now, well, that's the retailer that's got to pay that to him, whether he puts it on the cost to the customer. So you can see, can't you, the biggest move of capital from Labour, from money from Labour to capital since the 1930s, and they're actually proud when they're presenting it to their employees who they're shafting. They're actually proud that they're doing that, and so it's great that we call them out, and it's great. And we actually settled the pay as well, so that was another thing, because they buckled under the pressure without us even having to take industrial action. Now that's something I've never seen them do before. So they're getting a little bit nervous of the headlines that they will get when they start screwing over the workforce. Well, certainly UNILEVER is, because it likes to be a socially responsible employer, and in this instance it behaved very, very socially responsible. Disappointed me a little bit, because I was quite looking forward to getting out on the picket line, and I know we don't really want to be out on strike, but it's so exciting at the moment, the Port of Liverpool out and going down the UCU picket line in the morning, and bobbing over to the train station. It's an exciting time, and it's great to see us fighting back, and long may it continue. And that's me done and dusted.
So we're here to talk about the media and the way the media is organised in this country, and it's not a good story, is it, in terms of the balance in the media? But I want to start by saying something before I get to that, about our ability as mass organisations to change consciousness despite the fact of the media. So in 2017 we ran a school funding campaign during the general election, changed 750,000 votes, and we did that by reaching out, by getting head teachers to reach out. There was hardly any media coverage of that campaign outside the Morning Star, but we could still reach out, and that's what Dave Ward, that's what Mick Lynch is doing now. They're using a mass membership, they are reaching out beyond. But when you think about the role the Morning Star plays in the media of this country, and the Morning Star doesn't have a lot of money, but if you say the Times, the Telegraph, the Daily Express, the Daily Mail, the Sun, and if you just stop and ask yourself how they react to any of our disputes at any time, and there's no sense of, the BBC is supposed to have some notion of balance. There's absolutely no sense of balance in any of those newspapers. So I think back to some stages during COVID. the Daily Mail ran an attack piece on my union, saying that we were causing all the children in the school not to be, all the children in the country not to be in school, instead of the lack of preparation of the, and they ran a huge piece. Now, they are sexist and misogynist, so it was Mary that the main attack was on, that I was alongside, and Rachel, a colleague who has the great shame of being a Labour councillor, is labelled in the Daily Mail a full page attack on a union that's doing something to stand up for its members and the children in our schools. And that's what we get from them all the time. Slightly different register, the way the Telegraph or the Times talks about it, to the way the Sun or the Daily Mail talks about it, but absolutely no balance at all. Hardly ever is our voice represented, and if it is represented, it's always in their context of their argument. Now, sometimes on the TV you get a bit more of a chance to put your view over, but there's still the underlying explanations for everything in our society are still not the explanations that I would want to see. There are some papers which are slightly different to them. The Guardian, the Daily Mirror, they're marginally different. Sometimes they carry the voices of working people and they talk about kids being poor and hungry in schools, but there's very little where that is then connected to the mass organisations of our class and what we're going to do about it. So we get some of the reportage of the things being bad, but not a sense that there's something that we together can do about it. And I think that's what the Morning Star is doing, is linking together those voices of working people with the notion that working people can do something about it, that we're not just weak, that there are lots of us, and if we act together, we can make a difference. Now, so Cad asked me to say something about our ballot. So we've had our biggest ever electronic ballots, and across 20, I do need to say this, the CWU, when they reported their fantastic ballot result, they reported 97% yes vote on a 76% turnout across 1,500 workplaces. That's a really big task, 1,500. We've got 23,400 schools in England and Wales. So it's on a scale that is twice as much as the I'm not running the CW, their result was absolutely fantastic, but we have to try and reach into 23,400 schools. And we have smashed the thresholds, a 62% turnout, an 86% vote for strike action on that electronic ballot, and I'm really confident we're going to do it on the postal ballot as well. And the fact that the NASUWT and NAHT are doing it is going to make that all the more achievable. But when we do it, maybe before we do it, the Telegraph, the Times, the Mail, the Express, the Sun are all going to run stories saying these people kept children out of schools during COVID and now they want to keep them out of schools some more. That's the attack that we're going to face, and there'll be no voice in the mainstream media saying, actually, the action they took on January the 3rd, 2021, when we had 400,000 people at an online meeting and we said schools aren't safe to open the next day, and the Prime Minister changed his mind after we had that meeting because it was unsafe and because thousands of people would have died. Nobody will tell the truth about that except the Morning Star. So we need you to be telling that truth about our campaign. They will also say, you know, we're damaging education. They will say we're damaging education. Our position is not to take action at this point is going to damage education. If we let them carry on the sequence of underfunding schools, of underpaying teachers and support staff, then there will not be the teachers or support staff in our schools to educate our children. The morally right thing to do is to take action. That doesn't mean we want to take action. We want the government to give way before we have to take action. But it's the morally right thing to do to take action. It is what is defending education. And who is going to say that? Which of those newspapers, including the Mirror and the Guardian, who is going to put that case forward that we are doing the right thing? I think it's the Morning Star. It's the only newspaper that we've got on a daily basis that's got that sort of reach that will say those things, and I think that's vital. But I just want there's a couple of other things that I think are really important. We need our voices, we need our explanation, but sometimes there's some education that our media needs to do. When I was a young activist, and I can't remember whoever took me aside to tell me this, learning how to be a workplace representative, and somebody told me to look for the soft toilet paper moment. You know that, you know, we used to have hard toilet paper when I started teaching, that crinkly stuff. And people were saying, look for the thing that you can win easily. everybody wants soft toilet paper. Management can give way on it. Ask for that. Get a victory. Use that victory to go on and do another bigger victory. And that sort of trades union thinking through. What do you do when your management's a really tough nut? What do you do when your management's a bit softer? What do you do when some people say... And I think those discussions happen in the Morning Star. We've certainly had articles that I've written. Sometimes Gawain has helped me write them. But we've had articles about the organising plans that the union is putting in place. And it's vital that we talk about trades unionism in that sort of register as well. What is the active job of building trades unionism? And finally, I'd say, who else is saying... we know we have these huge problems of racism in our country, but who else says fundamentally at the core, black and white, unite and fight? And I think that's I don't think we get that from other media. We get stories about racism, we get sometimes stories about outrages, but the sense that actually putting it right is the job of working people, that sense that you have to be united on the picket line, black workers, white workers, on the picket line against the boss. I think the Morning Star makes a contribution to the fight against racism in our country, as well as the fight to build trades unionism and the fight for working class voices. So I'm pleased the Morning Star exists, and long may it continue and grow.
Right, mainstream media, they give you the problems, they don't give you the solutions. Whereas at the Morning Star joins the dots between the struggle in daily lives and the strikes and the picket lines that they result in. So thanks very much for that. I'd like to discuss the electronic ballots, and now you've got through to that. One would hope that you can have electronic ballots in a wider sense.
That would be nice.
And try and get rid of the postal ballots and all the restrictions and undemocratic nature that it brings to our disputes. Anyway, that's another issue. So, moving on to our final speaker is Ben Chacko. I've got the fullest respect for the work that he does, delivering our daily miracle every single day. I know the problems that they have in terms of finances, in terms of staffing, in terms of production. He keeps on top of that. He keeps on top of the politics. He keeps on top of brilliant editorials. I don't know how anybody survives without reading the Morning Star on a daily basis. So over to our editor, Ben Chacko.
Thanks very much, Kat. All the speakers so far have really led into the key kind of purpose of this meeting, which is to talk about the labour movement media's role in the fight for a new deal for workers. We've seen in recent weeks exactly what's wrong with the mainstream media in this country. Half of the press treated Kwasi Kwarteng's mini-budget as this amazing step forward. The Mail, the Telegraph could not contain their excitement. At last we have a real Tory budget. It all came apart very, very quickly. That just shows how unhinged some of these media monopolies actually are. When you're owned by a tax exile on an island somewhere in the Channel, perhaps you're a little bit divorced from what even a Tory government can actually get away with. And the financial markets, the Financial Times was a lot more realistic, was sceptical from the first, saying you're going to need a lot of cuts in public spending if you're going to get away with these kind of tax cuts. And they've brought this government to heel. But then we see, in the way that has happened, this media narrative that Jeremy Hunt is now in charge, he's restored responsibility to the nation's finances. There's a lot of personality stuff in today's papers, particularly about who's really in charge, Truss or Hunt. They'll go down that kind of route for a while. But actually what Hunt is doing, as we've heard from a number of speakers in this morning's debates, is restoring the austerity policies that were enacted 10 years ago, 12 years ago they began. It's just another round of devastating cuts which the Tories are planning. The Tories were very successful in doing that because they were able to shape a narrative 12 years ago that we were all in it together. It was a complete lie. Workers paid, rich people got much, much richer. Every year of that crisis there was no belt tightening by the rich. But the Labour Party and the soft left also played a role in establishing that narrative. The Labour Party called for cuts worse than Thatcher in the 2010 election, and it called for cuts not to be so far or so fast for the 2010 to 2015 Miliband period. They were not challenging the reality of what was happening. And I think we see echoes of that today in an attempt to limit the ambition. This is absolutely linked to what Kevin has just said about the way the Guardian, the Mirror present injustices in our society. You have the Labour Party front bench calling out a lot of what the Tories are doing wrong, but refusing to stand on picket lines, refusing to say that if workers want to actually do something about it, we will have their backs. And I think Sharon, in today's interview in the Morning Star, points out how bad that is, to give that impression that if you're on a picket line, you're doing something wrong, something damaging. Now, establishing these media narratives, it relies on a lot of things. It relies on being shown stuff every day, seeing it on the television and all that. It relies on a 24/7 news cycle as well, in which we're bombarded with crisis after crisis, and we can't keep up with the causative, the roots of the crisis that's striking us now. So we've had nothing but crises in British politics for pretty much the last, well, since before the Tories came to power, in fact. With the bankers' crash, we had austerity, we've had Brexit, we've had the pandemic, now we've got the cost of living crisis. And only in the context of ignoring all of the past elements of this crisis, which has got worse for working people at every stage of this, can we see Jeremy Hunt replacing Kwasi Kwarteng as some sort of riding to the rescue operation. Because actually, we need to keep track of the record of these Tories. Jeremy Hunt was absolutely key to the first austerity governments. He was the health secretary who ignored exercise sickness, for example, even though the government actually did an exercise which told them, oh, one of the first things that will happen in a pandemic is we'll run out of protective equipment. The government had that on their desks and did nothing about it, and of course that happened, and that cost thousands and thousands of lives. So Jeremy Hunt is not a new face for the Tories. He's a very old face, and what we're facing now is a government which is piling on another round of crippling cuts on top of services which actually were not able to protect people during the pandemic because of the previous round of terrible cuts. So you get this kind of cycle of nightmarish cycle getting worse and worse. Now, Mark Steele, the comedian, he wrote a book called Reasons to be Cheerful, in which he points out how they are able to normalise injustices over successive generations. He grew up in the kind of Thatcher period, and says, you know, when I was a teenager, it was unimaginable that you could have 1 million unemployed people in the country. That was not politically acceptable. Thatcher changed all that. Unemployment rose above 3 million. Since Thatcher, it's been considered completely normal to have millions of unemployed people, and nobody challenges that. Now, the David Cameron government, I would argue, played a very similar role. It normalised the idea that people would be able, relying on food banks, even if they were in full-time work, to feed themselves. Some people, not very many, but there were a number of cases where people died of starvation under the Cameron government because they were unable to afford food because their benefits had been sanctioned. Again, something that when I was growing up, I thought was unimaginable. In Britain is a rich country, people don't starve to death. In Britain, that happens in the third world. But no, this is something that has been normalised. And that is the real risk when we say that we are fighting for a New Deal. The real risk is that each time we just oppose the latest round of cuts. And I think McLynch was talking about that this morning. Labour is saying that they will reverse these particular anti-trade union laws, but what about all of those previous anti-trade union laws? We actually need a systematic challenge to everything that has been thrown at us over the past few decades. And when you do get that systematic challenge, all of the media line up to close ranks against it. And we saw that with the Jeremy Corbyn leadership of the Labour Party, a really vicious, concerted war on that systemic alternative. That is a huge problem for fighting back against the current round of Tory attacks. The pandemic made it absolutely clear how relevant many of those policies that Labour was pushing under Jeremy Corbyn are to actually solving today's problems. But they are being shut out of the conversation again by a media that won't listen, that won't report on those policies that are so key to our fight back. Sorry, my notes were written on the train, so they're very hard to read. So that is essentially where the Star comes in. There's been a number of positive comments about the Morning Star, as you'd hope, on one of our own platforms so far today. But as Kevin said, we are not the only paper that ever covers trade union issues. We're not the only, the Mirror will periodically have a trade union general secretary writing and so on. I would say we are, however, the only daily newspaper that is rooted in the trade union movement, that has all of these trade unions on our management committee, that has a dedicated industrial reporter, he's in our ranks today, Matt Trinder, covering strikes, going to picket lines, talking to workers, getting voices into the press who are not otherwise in the press. We're also the only socialist daily newspaper. As Cad said, we're joining the dots. People, speaking last, people are saying various things that I was going to say. Joining the dots between all of the different causes of the crisis that working people face. And we're the only agitational paper, as Kevin made so absolutely clear. We're not a paper that says, oh well, things are pretty bad and maybe we should elect a government that will do something about it for us. We're a paper that says no, working people can stand up, they can change things for themselves. That's rooted in our history, 90 plus years of standing with workers, as the paper of record of the working class. The paper that is at the heart of the campaigns that matter to you. That's a phrase from Bernadette, our brilliant circulation manager over there, because we provide a space for campaigns like the Albury Truth and Justice campaign, like the Shrewsbury 24, to push their priorities through the paper and to keep a record of the labour movement's wins, to celebrate our history as a trade union movement as well. So, how do we strengthen this voice for working people? The Morning Star needs to expand. It has had a difficult period. I think it's demonstrated its worth throughout the recent period as the only paper that supported the socialist turn in the Labour Party from 2015 to 2020, and as the only paper that really understood and tried to get to grips with the reasons why the pandemic in Britain had such a high casualty rate compared to many other countries, the roots of that in outsourcing, in poverty pay, in privatisation of the NHS supply chain and so on. So we have proved our worth, but it was a huge blow to us. We lost a huge number of sales over the course of the pandemic because shops were closing and union offices were closing and conferences were closed. We're still rebuilding from that base. We have got now all these new ways to get the paper, the home news delivery almost anywhere in the country. We can arrange that for you through Newsline, a company we work with on that. We've got the PDF edition and so on. But we absolutely have to rebuild sales to the level that they're at, that they were at in 2019, and more, because we were not strong enough, despite all of this great reportage, we were not strong enough to affect the course of the Jeremy Corbyn leadership in the Labour Party. How can you help us to do that? Well, we're in the biggest fight back that we've had for many, many years. And you can take the Morning Star onto picket lines. That's a really good way to get people to learn about the Morning Star. We're doing what we can to try and expand our coverage of all of that. We've got Lizzie over here, who's a brilliant new web assistant who is pioneering video content really for the Morning Star. And that was a huge hit at the Labour Party conference. We're hoping to get more video content, more online content to diversify our kind of platforms that we're on. We are always seeking, despite the financial difficulties, to increase our presence in different parts of the country. You'll see in today's paper there are adverts for the Scotland reporter job, which is a vacancy, but also for a part-time post based in Wales, which is a new role, and will be the only national daily newspaper to have a reporter based in Wales once we've filled that position. So we're always trying to build, but we do need your help to help us build, essentially. We need you to be going out there and saying, well, is my union branch subscribing to the Morning Star? Are we getting the Morning Star into workplaces? Are we making sure that it's on picket lines and that we're talking to people about the need for this paper? Because without it, we're not going to survive for 90 odd years. I have absolutely every faith in our readers and supporters who donate to the Fighting Fund every month, who raised huge amounts of money in an appeal during the pandemic. I don't think the Morning Star is about to disappear, but it needs to be stronger. We need a daily socialist newspaper in this country. Some people say newspapers are out of date. I go on this rant every now and again. It's really important that we keep a daily newspaper alive. It doesn't really matter how you consume it in terms of reading it online or in print. But the internet is not a substitute for having a socialist daily newspaper. The internet is even more owned and controlled by an even smaller number of gigantic corporations than the traditional press. And they politically edit what we're able to see. They use algorithms that tend to focus your politics in certain directions. We've seen all kinds of problems caused by that. But it also can tend to narrow your focus down to one or two issues that you look at all the time. The Morning Star provides every day a really broad outlook. It covers sport, it covers culture, it covers international politics, it covers trade union politics. And that is why we need to be reading the Morning Star every day. So I think I'll probably leave it there.